Hello, everybody, and welcome back to KXP, the series where we aim to explore. However, in the last episode and in this one, we are going to rescue instead. We have some stranded Kerbals on MINTZ in the last episode, Jeb, Bob, Bill, and Val, and we got them safely home. And so now we turn our eyes to low Kerbin orbit, and we have to rescue Grayson Kerbin, another engineer who will make a fabulous addition to our team. But first, we have a bunch of science. We're going to take a look at our contracts. None of these are going to be our focus today, except for rescuing Grayson Kerbin. It would like to perform a series of orbital maneuvers, because basically that's just a rendezvous. However, the game wants us to rendezvous with our space station, and so we're not going to be able to satisfy that contract. So first up, we're going to take advanced aerodynamics because I want to start moving our way towards space planes. We're going to take unmanned tech because it has a lot of good probe stuff. Landing, I can't believe we haven't unlocked better landing gear. Heavy command modules because we're going to be doing some crewed missions soon, and I'd like to have more than one Kerbal at a time. We don't really have enough science to spend on anything else, so that's all we are going to get for now. However, we do have quite a bit of money, so I'm going to just take a look at each one of the buildings to see what's worth upgrading. We can afford to upgrade the VAB, but we don't really need to at the moment. But the astronaut complex is going to be vital because I don't believe we can hold any more Kerbals. So once we rescue them, we need to be able to house them somewhere. We pick up 2 missions just to create space stations, but again, that's not going to be our focus today. So what we want to do, I want to, in part, just design something that I can use for future missions. And so I decided to come up with a space bike, which is basically an RCS and liquid fuel powered zero gravity, or low gravity, I should say, because the idea is we want to be able to take this down to MINTZ and collect the science that is left over in that rover, and as well as collect any science on in any new biomes. And then we want to be able to lift off once again and return to the space station that we will eventually have in MINTZ orbit. So we want this to be both a probe as well as a command seat, so that way we can fly it with a Kerbal to go down and collect science, collect surface samples, collect moon rocks, but we also want to be able to fly it via the probe, because if we want to, for example, take this and use it as a rescue vehicle, then we're going to need the space in the seat to not have a pilot. So here I am using the RCS build aid mod. This is kind of my first time really playing around with it, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. I'm not really entirely sure what I'm looking at here, but I am trying to just balance it as best I can. I think it was letting me know that I didn't need the ones on the top, that the ones that I created on the side were enough. I'm going to have to experiment with that. And that's something that I kind of noticed just now in the actual reviewing of the footage, that I may actually have, with those 5 thrusters, I may have all 6 directions covered. But anyways, I want to have some landing gear on this because, like I mentioned, it's my goal to land it on MINTZ, and it'd be nice to just have something to keep a barrier between the surface and the craft. And so now we want some way to attach it to the space station, and the space station only has the large clampetrons. Clampetrons. And so we can't fit a large one on here very comfortably, so instead we decided to go for the grabbing claw, because we can do everything that we need with a docking port with a grabbing claw as well. We just have to be a little bit better about where we position it. So I take this light. It's from the Tracking's Light mod. Highly recommend it because you can have it focus on whatever active vessel is around, so it will make docking a little bit easier. As well as some EVA activity, you'll be able to have a light that focuses on the Kerbal around. So it is about time to get the testing. This is close to what I want. It's not entirely built, but let's go ahead and start with some of the action groups. I want to take these lights off. These are meant for landing, and so we're going to attach those lights to the landing gear action group. We are also going to toggle the grabbing claw as well as the reaction wheel, so both of those are going to be on their own action groups. But for action groups 2 and 3, I like to reserve those for communications and satellite, or solar panels. And so we want to make sure that we get those on here because this thing is going to need to be able to be self-sufficient for the most part, minus the fuel aspect, but it needs to be able to charge its own batteries. It needs to be able to communicate all the way from MINTZ to Carbon. So we have a pretty hefty communication dish on there, but it's nice because it's a low profile. It folds down pretty easily. I don't like that it clips into the light, but you know, what can you do? It's either the light or the RCS, and so let's go ahead and get our the rest of our action groups all set up. We're going to put a regular Communitron 16 on there just to have communication with it if during the time that the communication dish is not open. We're going to name the cameras, but I won't end up using an advanced enough tech to utilize it in this time around. So that's pretty much it. That is our space bike in a nutshell. Not too much. It's got RCS to kind of do some fine-tune maneuvering, but it's got an actual liquid fuel and oxygen engine to let it come from orbit down to the surface and went back again. So I just tested that on the from MINTZ down to the surface and then back up into orbit again, and it seems to work out just fine. This space bike will be exactly what we need for the purpose that it was initially intended for. However, whether or not it proves to be a good rescue vehicle has yet to be seen. If you're interested in the test flights I did, you get to see the entirety of the MINTZ trip that I just took to see if it lands, as well as the many attempts that it took to get this vehicle ready for the mission itself. All you have to do is click the join button down at the bottom of the video, become a channel member, and you'll be able to see early access footage and a lot of my testing footage, which is basically several episodes in and of itself, because I run multiple tests to make sure I can get everything right. So you'll eventually see the entirety of the mission long before the episode comes out. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and check that out. Button at the bottom of the video. Anyways, we have finished our bike, but now we have to turn into a rescue bike. So I kind of talked through it, but we have a heat shield now with a decoupler to attach, as well as 2 drogue chutes. Those are just drogue chutes. They're just meant to slow you down. They're not actually meant to be parachutes. However, the payload that we have is small enough that I think 2 drogue chutes will adequately slow us down enough to land safely. I don't know why I didn't get the fairing shield because of the decoupler, so I decided to just make myself feel a little bit better about its look of not being connected by adding some struts there. And we are now going to put in this tiny little fuel tank and engine, and this is going to be basically either whatever completes our orbit or simply just to be our rendezvous engine. technically we have quite a bit of delta V in the space bike itself that we don't necessarily need this engine. However, since this is the first run of it and we really want to rescue Grayson, we don't want to leave him stranded in orbit longer than we have to, or worse, have him die in the rescue attempt. So we're going to make this a little over-engineered, pack a little more fuel, a little more thrust, and everything will be good. So again, we don't get the fairings, but on this time we just say, you know, we just live with it and it'll be fine. And now I'm starting to make my lift vehicle, but since this is a very small and very light payload, it's not going to take much. Just this set of tank engine alone has over 4,000 meters per second of delta V, so it's going to be able to get to orbit just on this stage. And it's got over 1.4 thrust to weight ratio, so it's going to have no problem taking off from the launch pad. I throw an SRB in upside down and kind of bury it within the lower stage, and this is meant to deorbit this when we separate. Because this is going to take us into orbit, we don't want to leave the space trash in orbit as well, so we're going to deorbit this. We also threw on some of the real chute parachutes because we have the stage recovery mod. Excuse me. Now we're throwing on the stage recovery mod parachutes, which will hopefully allow us to save some of our money and retrieve this lower stage. So now I took all the pilots out of it and I did a test flight to see that it could get to orbit. I did have a few problems. One of the things that I want to fix is add a bigger SRB in there because it didn't have enough power to deorbit, but I'm pretty sure just a longer burning, a little bit heavier thrusting SRB is the trick. So on a bright yet thunderous dawn, we get ready to launch. So now I have some frame drop issues. I'm not entirely sure what the problem was, and I'm still working on trying to fix it. However, this lower stage will have some hiccupings to it, so I decided to speed up the footage on the launch just to get through it to make it look a little less bad. As you saw there, those frame drops where it just paused for a second. It was very difficult to fly through and to look at, so I apologize about some of this jumpiness. However, like I mentioned, it's only in this lower stage. In all my attempts, it's always just been the lower stage. Once we separate and get to the next stage, not even up to orbit, but just once we separate this lower stage, we regain our frame rate back. So, but it was just a very cool launch. You know, I couldn't just skip past it. So hopefully the time lapse or the sped up aspect of it makes it a little less jarring. It's still not great to look at. It looks, you know, pretty poor quality, but it's a little less annoying. Alright, so we have our circularization maneuver plotted, so now we are putting it into flight computer and allowing our flight computer to take care of it. And we only need 1,000 delta V, and we have, well, more than that. Plenty left in the tank. Our gimbling is a little much. We should have turned it down. We did turn it down about halfway, but we should have turned it down even more. It was a little hard to see, but we got 40,000 funds because we had launched a vessel over the allotted tonnage required for it. So now, even though we have a little bit of fuel left, like 500 meters per second delta V, which would be very useful in this mission, we're just going to go ahead and toss that because in all of our tests, we found out that once we got rid of that lower stage, our frame rate returned. So now the rest of this is going to be in real time, and I'm going to leave the footage mostly unedited. It was quite a journey on this this path of rescue. This is the first rendezvous that we have done in this series anyways. We don't do a lot of rendezvous in all of our previous series, so I decided to focus a little more on it, pay a little more attention to the process, and show it to you as well. First thing we want to do, now that we're in orbit, is match our inclination to our target. We selected it. Well, first thing you want to do is select your target. But then at either the ascending node or the descending node, you want to plot a maneuver that brings you as close to 0.0 inclination, relative inclination. I am going to, at all the appropriate maneuvers, I'm going to kind of bring up the rendezvous screen, make it a little bit larger, a little bit easier to read. And we're gonna just enjoy some smooth jazz as we just lazily drift in low curve and orbit and make our way towards our target. And most of the burns that we're going to need to do are going to be very small. As you can see, this one's only 16.8, and we have over 1,000 delta V. So I have no fear that we will have enough fuel to handle the trip. Yeah, as you see in the top left, I brought up the screen, and you can see that the relative inclination is now dropping to 0.01. That will be good enough. So now we are on the same plane in space as the craft that we're trying to meet up with, so we will have a lot better time. So now comes the hard part, which is finding a place where your two paths intersect. This is typically what the most difficult part of Rendezvous is finding out where you will meet up with your desired target. And then once you have an intercept like that, then it's a matter of matching the orbit, matching the velocity, and bridging the gap between you two. I have a little bit of trouble here because I ended up getting into almost the same exact orbit that my target is in. However, my target is at a different location than I am. So typically the best thing to do here would be to go into an elliptical orbit, give yourself a higher apoapsis, or if you have the room, a lower apoapsis, as long as you don't bring it below the atmosphere. And then wait for your crafts to meet up at another point. However, I managed to luck out using a little bit of radial out with my prograde. You'll see I'm pulling it retrograde here, but that's not going to be helpful. But when I pull it prograde, it gives me that elliptical orbit. You know, I'm now no longer on the same path. However, we have, as you see, these little orange markers and the yellow intersect key. We are now closing the distance between the two crafts, as well as lowering our relative speed. Both of those are very important. But sometimes you'll find that you can't get any closer, and the closest we can get to that was 10.2 kilometers. So we leave it at 10.4 as our rendezvous, and bring our thrust limiter back so that way we can use the full aspect of our engine, because we are going to be needing to make some high brake maneuvers. Since we're changing our orbit, it's going to add more speed. That once we rendezvous, once we get close enough to the target, we'll be going much faster than we want to, and so we're going to need all the thrust to weight that we can get, so that way we can stop in a short enough time to make it worthwhile. However, we got to be careful not to have too much thrust, because then you can send yourself hurtling past your target. Alright, as we approach our maneuver, this will be the one that will put us on course with the stranded Kerbal. Once again, I'm going to bring up the rendezvous info screen in the top left, and you're looking at the closest approach distance. That is the important part. Below that is the relative velocity of the closest approach. That's the second most important part. Those are what we're going to be focusing on when we look at that screen. And I will be, once it gets closer to the approach time, we'll be having that on for longer. I tried to play around with the editing here to kind of give focus on certain things, the most important parts to it. So now we are once again looking at that intersect 1, and we are trying to get even closer to our target. 10.3 kilometers is nice and close, but it's still not within visible range. You want to get 2 kilometers or lower typically. So now the lowest I ended up getting there was 9.6. Once again, we are now on a different plane, or a different orbital path, so I play around with a little bit of the radial in and radial out, but ultimately I choose to abandon that maneuver as well. We're going to plot one right there, right at the exact intersection. I'm going to pull it out a little bit, and click on the node, which will bring up the information and keep it pinned to the screen. And still not good enough. It really pays off to take your time and really plan these maneuvers out. Sometimes if you're lucky, or if you just plan it right, you can do your maneuvers for very, very little delta V, which is always nice. Or sometimes you can also get lucky and find yourself a very nice close intersection where you're already going slow enough that it doesn't take very much to just cancel out your relative velocity. As you see here, I'm pulling the retrograde, and not only am I getting closer, but I'm getting slower as well, which is great because, like I mentioned, that's, you know, half the battle. I'm going to take the relative velocity here. We could get closer than 9.8 meters, or excuse me, 9.8 kilometers. However, the fact that we're only going to be going 14 meters per second relative to our target is very appealing to me right now, because then I can easily cancel out our relative velocity. And once we're both going the same exact speed, once it says on my nav ball under target, once it says 0.0 meters per second, we are essentially standing still relative to each other. And then at that point, I can just point my craft and burn towards my target and close the distance from there. As you can see from the rendezvous screen, we are now going 9.8 meters per second relative to our target, and we're only a little under 9.5 kilometers away. So we're very close, relatively speaking. So we can just close the distance between us and then focus on lining ourselves up for an actual maneuver. So I go ahead and kill flight computer, so that way I have control of SAS. We're no longer going to need it. We're not going to be making any maneuvers in the map screen. We are now going to just pilot ourselves over there using our nav ball and our informational panels. So now I'm burning retrograde to the target, and that brought my relative velocity down. Now we're pointing directly towards the target, and that is lowering our closest approach to distance. However, it's raising our relative velocity because we are now, you know, hurtling towards our the target. But now we brought our closest approach down to just over a kilometer, which is a lot closer. So all we'll have to do is cancel out the amount of delta V, the amount of speed that we built up heading towards the target. Just by the time we get there, we have to make sure that we can cancel it out. It's only 103 meters per second, so that's actually not too bad. We can, with the amount of thrust we have, we can cancel that out a lot. And it's also only 521 meters, or 520 meters distance between us. So once again, we are now closing the distance. So it's all just a matter of steps. You know, first you get yourself into orbit, then you get yourself in the same plane as the target that you are trying to rendezvous with. Then you have to find yourself a good place to rendezvous, a nice intersection where you both will be in the same place at the same time. I lucked out. Oftentimes you'll find yourself having a little more trouble than that because the crafts are just too far away, And like I mentioned, bring yourself out into a more elliptical orbit, and maybe sometimes waiting more than one orbit to rendezvous, and sometimes you'll have better luck. But anyways, here we are canceling out our relative velocity once again, trying to get as close to 0 as possible. We got 0.6 going 6 millimeters per second. I don't know what the MMS is, but so we killed our velocity towards the target. However, we still weren't close enough, so I burned towards it, fired once again, and now we're only going to be 74 meters apart. We might actually be able to see it at that point. However, we are about to approach the night side of the planet. And time warp our way. We don't need to burn at it any faster. We're only going to be going 3.5 meters per second as we approach. And so we're actually lined up to be parked outside of our target very soon. Really wish I had put more lights on this, but it's okay. This original design wasn't meant to be a rescue craft, and I ended up flying right on past it because we are playing with remote tech and we did not have any signal, which meant that we had absolutely no control over the probe. So even though I wanted to slow down, I did not have the ability to. I burned full throttle, which made me overshoot my target, or overshoot my intended speed drop target. We are now once again pointed towards our target. We point retrograde relative to it, so that way when we pass close enough, we can go ahead and turn on our throttle a little more gently this time. Kill our relative velocity much smoother. There we go. We are now at 0.0 meters per second. We are not moving in comparison to that. So now we can just approach it and then use our RCS to fine-tune our grabbing of the machine. But we need to do this with a little bit more light. I'm not going to do that in the middle of the night. However, once we got into dawn, we lost signal, so we had to time warp a little bit farther, which put us much farther away than we had been before, but still we were going relatively very low velocity relative to each other, so it will take no time to recover. I start to use RCS, but I did forget that it adjusts your orbit a lot more than just using a reaction wheel does. So now our closest approach distance is 76 meters, which was not ideal. So we are going to once again point towards our target, use our liquid fuel engines to burn. But rather than using our RCS to flip ourselves around, we are now just going to use our RCS to stop us. However, once again, blow right on past it because we have no signal. Doing this in a probe setting can be very frustrating when you play with remote tech. So, once more, onto the breach, my friends. We are now pointed back towards our target, trying to bring our closest approach distance down as much as possible. We're going to limit our thrust so we're not overshooting our target as much. 96 meters is still not very close, but we are going to kind of ease our way in there. We have not quick saved by this point, and I'm going to try to do this mission without reverting to any kind of save. I want to either sink or swim with this. We either save Grayson or we don't. And either way, we are going to do something in this episode. Whether we praise a hero for his daring return or mourn an intrepid explorer for his unfortunate circumstances. So now we are kind of orbiting around it. We're not in the best trajectory. So we decided to let our RCS kind of point the way and once again kill our velocity with the target. We were about to lose it right there. It was going to be real bad. So now I am going to be using RCS for the rest of this endeavor, because that will be able to align us a lot better than trying to flip ourselves back and forth using the reaction wheel and the singular direction of our engine. So I did forget that I had my SAS on, so it really wanted to flip around retrograde. So once again, we kill out our velocity, our relative velocity, point ourselves towards our target, or close enough towards our target. We're going to use RCS to kind of push our way towards it. And then now comes the tricky part. We have our hook at the bottom, so we're going to flip ourselves sideways to it. But of course, it's a little hard to see what we're aiming at. And I kept zooming in there by accident because I had yet to remap the zoom function off of the key that I remapped the translate up function. So I do that eventually, but if you ever see me zooming in real fast for no apparent reason, it's because of that. Anyways, I talked through the most crucial part, but we made it. We have successfully hooked on to this little floating capsule. We transferred our crew. Grayson Kerman is now in the pilot's seat, so we're going to go ahead and let go of his little almost coffin, so to speak. And so now we are on a space bike. We have plenty of Delta V left to do anything. We could potentially go to the moon and back, or the moon and back, excuse me. But I think we've had enough adventure for one day. So let's go ahead and work on bringing this Kerbal back home. I want to find the best spot for my reentry. I don't want my periapsis to be so low that we have a very steep reentry, so I want to keep it around 40 meters, or excuse me, 40 kilometers. So it really depends on where I burn. And I'd like to land in the daytime, so we plot our maneuver accordingly. So we are going to be using flight computer, once again, remote text flight computer, to handle our maneuver. We're just going to let it burn automatically so that way we can be as accurate as possible. But this was very exciting. I don't do too many rescue missions, and so I'm always really thrilled when it comes out correctly. Like I mentioned before, I don't actually do too many rendezvous either, so that is something that I think I'm going to try to work on and try to improve upon, because it's going to be very useful. So we bring up our orbital information, and you can just see that our periapsis is now below the Kármán line, and we're going to kind of drop it off at around 40 kilometers. 38's good enough. That's still not too steep, so that'll work out. Let's go ahead and kill the flight computer so we have SAS control once again. And we are within signal range, which is good. Grayson is not a pilot, so there is still a lot of this journey that's going to be made from the probe control room. Even though we're not in IBA mode, it's still Gene and Gus and the other Kerbal, slightly forgettable. Sorry. We're getting the IVA seat ready, just in case we want to kind of pilot it from there. I wanted to have it just set up so we don't have to be setting it up in the midst of our reentry. but I don't think I'm going to use it very much. It's not the best craft for reentry. But since we don't need our space bike aspect to this anymore, we didn't actually use it at all, so we're just going to go ahead and jettison that as well. It has a full tank of gas, everything is still useful on it. However, it's going to block our heat shield, it might set us off balance, so we're just going to go ahead and get rid of it. Unfortunately, there is a pretty advanced probe core that was attached to that we had also jettisoned. So we're going to take a look at our stage recovery mod, and we can see that our lifting stage, the one that was giving us so much trouble, was successfully recovered. It was only recovered 29.9%. It was far enough away from the KSC that we didn't get a lot of it back. However, we got all of the pieces back, so that's nice. It's a proof of concept that we can slightly reuse that lower stage. But now comes the very difficult and very harrowing time of re-entering the atmosphere. And I put on this small heat shield because I didn't want to ruin the aesthetic of the bike. I didn't want to ruin the profile of it. However, I was realizing in this moment that it offered very little, if any, protection to the actual command seat itself. And so while the heat shield will be protecting the battery, the probe core, the parachutes, and cameras, there is no guarantee that it's going to protect the most important part, being Grace and Kerman. And I did not test that aspect of it. Once I tested the bike and everything, I realized that, oh, this is a low enough payload, it should be fine. We'll just slap some parachutes on it, heat shield, everything will be good. I did not test this aspect. So realizing that it had been a very long time since I had quick saved. In fact, I couldn't actually tell you when I had quick saved. I realized that I was in trouble. And as we try to put on our SAS, it tells us that because we have no pilot and no probe smart enough, we will not have SAS on this descent. Meaning I can't just hold myself retrograde and let the heat shield take the brunt of it. We are going to be rotating, which means different parts will be gaining heat. And this is not going to be a textbook reentry by any means. So our heat shield is building up heat as well as our command seat. Everything seems to be about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way filled on that heat bar. It is very unnerving, and I am jamming on the keys in every direction that I can, but our craft seems to be settling into its final resting place of just slightly off kilter from retrograde. That's so much heat. I am literally on the verge of explosion this entire time, and I'm not even through the thickest part of the atmosphere. Grayson seems to be having a good old time. He's calm, cool, collected as a cucumber. I am freaking out, though. For some reason, our craft decided to transmit the crew report, which is also not a very good sign, because I feel like it's the last will and testament. Give my wife my love, so to speak. We turned the seat around hoping to get a face full of re-entry heat, but unfortunately did not. And then I glitched myself out by turning the seat around but exiting before it finished. And just like that, I was able to breathe again. The heat effect dissipated, and we are safely, once again, in the better part of the atmosphere. And that all we have to do is make sure that our drogue chutes can slow us down in enough time before we hit the water. Worst case scenario, we can always let Grayson spread his wings a little bit and parachute himself down. But I feel pretty comfortable that we can call this mission a success. As you see here, I'm still stuck in the back position and the switch doesn't work, and I realized that is because I had exited the IVA mode mid-rotate, and so don't recommend doing that. But I do recommend that IVA mode. It's the ECS_IVA mod. You can search that online. It's I don't believe it's on CCAN, so you may have to find it on GitHub. But if you're wondering what that IVA mode is for that command seat, it's that one, and it's quite nice. There's two versions of it. There's a plain version as well. But anyways, we are now breaking through the cloud layer. We can see the ocean below us. We are going slow enough, and our parachutes are getting ready to open fully, that I have no fear that Grayson Kerman will be joining our team once again. What he was doing in space, who can say? So my mouse slightly hovered over the stage recovery button, and I saw that we had 3 things to recover. This first one was what we expected, but I was very surprised to see that the entirety of the space bike that we had gotten rid of was refunded 72%, and a ton of money, as well as the rendezvous engine that we used, the liquid fuel engine. All of that was refunded as well, 78%. And it took me a little bit to figure out why this was the case, but it's because each of those had a probe core on it and enough fuel to power land itself. So the stage recovery took that all into consideration and basically handled the landing for us. So we actually recovered every single part of this mission to some degree or another. So this was a great test. A test of our crafts, a test of our technology, and a test of our abilities. But I think I'm going to stop talking here because we need to rescue Grayson before he ends up on the bottom of the ocean floor. But there we are. We gained quite a bit of money from that, quite a bit of reputation. Grayson got his very first star and will become our next engineer. We might have to send him up into space and work on a launch pad of sorts. It's a very misty day here at the KSC. Quite beautiful, in my opinion. As you see here, we didn't satisfy any other contract but Grayson, but honestly, that is just so fulfilling and gratifying that I am just so happy to call this episode here. But anyways, that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more KXP. If you did, please consider giving me a like, drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.